Namaste, my friends. Welcome to Jack Colley's Black Book. This is episode number 36. And out of episode 35, we left with this idea that when we are dealing with something eternal, something holy, what we might term God, what we might term the underlying pulse or river of the universe, when we are dealing with these things that are not tangible, that cannot be measured, we are forced to use symbols in order to communicate about them, in order to make sense of them. And so we talked about how in the major religions, there are these concepts that drive us toward this understanding that God cannot be fathomed, at least as we as human beings are captured in, the space-time continuum, that there has to be a continuous search toward understanding, and that the closer we get to the truth of what something is, particularly something holy, particularly something that we might term God, the closer we get to that, quite often, the further away we realize that we are. And so there are these symbols that we use. In Hinduism, we have the idea of Brahman, which is the flow of life. It's the Godhead. And even then, I'm being careful not to apply a term, because as soon as I apply a term, I've limited it. It's in the Taoist tradition. It's the great integrity that the first part of the Tao states. As soon as you put a name on this great integrity, you've already limited it. As soon as you name the great integrity is no longer the great integrity. In Judaism, there's the concept of Yahweh, which some have said is like breath. There's no vowels. And I was practicing yoga the other day, and I was breathing, and I was listening to my breathing going in and out of the nose. And I started to think to myself, Yahweh. So I was taking, inhaling and exhaling. And I could almost hear Yahweh. I could almost hear those intonations of vowels. I don't know if that's true or not, or if my mind is just creating something, but you try it and tell me what you think. But this idea that everything comes down to just simply a breath, the breath that created the universe, the breath of life. God breathes life into something. And in Judaism or in Christianity, I think it's the Christ. The Christ is the way of everything, that it's always been, the Alpha, it's always been. Christ has always been. There's no beginning, no end. And then we have Jesus, who is the symbol of Christ. And some people would say God incarnate. But we have these ideas that something exists, and we are forced, just by our human limitations, to have to use symbols to communicate and conceptualize them. And so I've made the argument that when we put something, when we attach a name to something, when we start symbolizing something, in some ways we already know that that's not it. And when we look at these symbols, sometimes we have this feeling like, okay, there's just something off about this. There's just something that seems very limiting. So we're going to take a look at several examples that I have found of this. And I want to start with a video clip. I'm going to try a multimedia. This is the multimedia portion of our broadcast today. And this is a video by Sunseed, and you can look this up on YouTube if you want to see the whole thing. And the name of the song is Jesus is My Friend, and it was made in the 1980s. But this is the first example that I want to show you of something where, at least for me, when I watched it, it was like, number one, I started to laugh, because it's in the 1980s, and I thought, man, this is really cheesy, this is really cheap in a way. And there was a part of me that was kind of like, oh my gosh, man, your idea of God and Jesus is just so limited. And then I also thought this is another good example of the Jesus is my boyfriend syndrome, which is, I think in our culture, we have tendency sometimes to present Jesus as this emasculated, almost impotent lack of power, lack of ability to reproduce individual who he's just your friend. He's, Jesus is my friend, and I'm just in love with him, and I'm going to listen and sing music, and we lose this, we lose the reality of Jesus, where he stood up to the government. He stood against nationalism. He pointed out when individuals were just conflicted and turned on themselves. We miss that when we have this emasculated type Jesus that we present. So I want to show you this. Just listen to a couple. I'll just show you a couple little segments, and I'll have to change the settings here.
Meant to praise his name. Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus. Jesus is a friend of mine. 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 Once I tried to run and hide, but Jesus came and found me, and he touched me down inside. He is like a Mountie, he always gets his man, and he'll zap you any way he can.
All right. So Jesus is a Mountie. He always gets his man. So Jesus chases after you, and Jesus is a Mountie. He always catches his man, or something like that, and he'll zap you anyway. I think they said zap. He'll zap you any way he can. Again, it just seems like this is such a cheap version of Jesus. And so many of the symbols, because I have several more we're going to look at, the problem with so many of these symbols is that people do get offended by them, but they don't understand that a lot of times what's being mocked is not the actual Rabbi Jesus, but it is, in effect, it's somebody's perception of Jesus. And so, we have to look at that too, that we can't be all offended and think that we have to protect Jesus when people do these sorts of things, because you're going to have a very difficult time. I would think most people, in fact, I can't even think of anything somebody could say was offensive or limiting about at least the Jesus presented in the Bible or the Synoptic Gospels or the Gnostic Gospels that would somehow be, Jesus deserves to get mocked, when you look at the impact that he had on the culture around him, when you look at how he included those in fringe society, those on the outer boundaries of life, how he incorporated and sought them out. Jesus is this incredibly, he's an incredibly powerful, beautiful symbol of, I think, how God relates to us. This came across on my feed, and if you got kids around, put it on mute, because I can't think of another way of describing this. Then when this came across my social media feed, and I wish I could show you the video, but I wanted to block out all the names, the comments, because when this came across, they're babies on a runway, and this is a baby dressed like Jesus. And I don't know if I think I was in bed when this came across, and I remember I at least thought it. I may have said it out loud, but I said, this is utterly fucked up. This is one of the most disrespectful, fucked up things I have ever seen in my life. Like, I couldn't even laugh at it. There are some images of Jesus used in cartoons that I'll show you that I find humorous, because it's more a commentary on what society, on what American culture has done to Rabbi Jesus. But this is just, this is just fucked up. It's flat out wrong. And so what we have here is we've got a baby carrying a crucifix, two babies carrying crucifixes. We have crowns of thorns on both of them. This one, I don't know what this word is, commenate. I don't know if that's a foreign word. I don't know what that means. But this is amen on this baby's stomach, walking next to a lamb, carrying an empty cross. And when I looked at these symbols, I just thought, this is just twisted. Now, the symbol in and of itself is bad enough, but when you look at the comments that people were making in relation to this symbol, and there were some in there that, every once in a while you had a comment of somebody who was legitimately upset and should be. But when you look at the comments on the side, I'll go right down reading the ones that I blacked out, right in order. You have amen, 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 best idea, sweet babies, amen, amazing, I love it, God bless them more, God bless you all. All of the thumbs up and the likes for something like this just leads me to think there is not enough people who know the rabbinical Jesus, who know Jesus the Christ, the narrative that is presented in the Synoptic and the Gnostic Gospels. Because if you understood the narrative, there's no way you could conclude that this was okay in any way, shape, or form. And the thing is, people like it. And I want to show you something else, just another little tangent here. I purchased these at Hobby Lobby, and these are jelly beans. And they are made by a company called Jesus, sweetest name I know. And each packet of jelly bean, it comes in different colors. And the black jelly bean is sin. The red one is Jesus' blood. And you have a white one, which is clean. Yellow is heaven. Green is growth. Purple is royalty. And then on the back, you have the jelly bean prayer. So you can take out your packet of jelly beans and you can go through this prayer. You can, evangelize and save your neighbor. It's from the Christian craft store, Hobby Lobby, because businesses even can now carry the symbolism of Christ, of God. And so you'll see coffee mugs that have the name of the business and there's a cross right next to it. Or you'll see somebody's business cards and they have the Christian fish. And if you think about it, I don't know of very many other religions, at least religious figures that do this. Certainly, there is a reason. There was a comedian. I don't know if this is appropriate to share or not, but so I'm just telling you this comedian that I saw. And there was a comedian that was talking about how people get upset when he jokes about Jesus. And he how comedians can sometimes drop a punchline with a really straight face. And he was like looking in the camera and he said, Christians get all upset because people mock Jesus. And then they say, well, why don't you mock other religions? And this comedian, of course, deadpan face, says, well, maybe you should try to blow something up. Now, of course, that is in reference to Islam. And none of my Muslim or my Muslim friends, I have no Muslim friends that would espouse violence and say violence is an answer to anything. And yet there is this idea that if you mess around with certain symbols, it's going to be to your detriment. And because of that, the symbols are taken very seriously. So one can only imagine if you saw a video made like this, where an infant was made to look like the Prophet Muhammad. And again, it's almost like you have this spectrum. On one end, you have these images, these symbols that point us toward God that are just cheapened by, making a candy company out of them or a craft store. And I'll give you some other examples. And then on the other hand, you have these symbols that are taken so seriously that people are going to lose their lives. And I'd like us all to maybe come to the middle a little bit more and maybe get rid of symbols like these and also, just kind of have a respect for the idea that these symbols have to exist. We need them. All right, moving on. So here's Family Guy. Again, I have two examples of shows that I really like to watch. I think they're hilarious. And one is Family Guy and the other is South Park. And people will get all offended at this. And yet at the same time, I think if you really look at these, the use of these symbols, these are not commentaries on the actual Rabbi Jesus that is portrayed in the Synoptic Gospels or the Gnostic Gospels. Because again, I can't think of anything that you could point to in the narratives about Jesus, the historical narratives about Jesus, that one could mock and one could ridicule. But when you look at the Jesus that is sometimes presented in America, this is very real. I mean, here's Jesus. He's got, I'm going to call it an AK-47. I have no idea what it is, but it's some sort of a weapon. And then in the back, if you look really closely, you've got, to the left of Jesus's hand, you've got a basket of magazines, full of bullets. You've got some guns on top. You've got handguns to the right, and you've got grenades. All of these are pieces of technology that have been designed to harm or kill human beings. And yet, every day you come across people in our particular culture that seem to think that they can say, I love the teachings of Jesus, but I am going to own my weapons with the intent of, blowing somebody away if they mess with my stuff. And it's just this dichotomy and this tension that eventually the individual is going to have to address, because it's completely opposite. I mean, when you take all of the nonviolent teachings of the Jesus narrative, and then you combine that with individuals who will just fight, tooth and nail for their Second Amendment right because they love their guns, that's just a dichotomy that doesn't exist. And let me say this. I have friends that own guns, but these are also friends that are not running around, saying how much they love Jesus. And I have friends who love Jesus and understand that, you can't have guns. You can't do it both ways and be at peace with yourself. So, let's just continue. I went for a drive because a while ago I had crossed paths with, I had found this mailbox. I was driving down the road. I saw this mailbox. And on the side of the mailbox, it said, Faith, Family, Firearms, Freedom. And I thought, it's kind of interesting. And I should have pulled over and taken a picture of it then, but I didn't think of it. And then I'm preparing for this particular episode. So I went out for a drive and I tried to find that sign again, because I like to take my own pictures and I couldn't. So I came home and got on Amazon and I typed in Faith, Family, Firearms, and Freedom. And look at what came up here. So I've got 3 pictures here. I got a t-shirt and a couple of flags. Looking at this, it's kind of like going back to when you were a child watching Sesame Street. It's like, which one doesn't belong type thing, and you've got faith, fire. Right in the middle is firearms. And we have to start really critiquing this stuff. Like, what part of us thinks that we can use the Christian cross? And I'm going to explain what I think the Christian cross represents in a minute here. And we can put it right in the middle of, right next to this list, faith, family, firearms, and freedom. Like, when I look at that, I just think there's just something wrong. That creates a tension in me that just doesn't make sense. Like, that's something that I cannot accept. And here's I think why. So here's a couple of pictures. On the left, I have an empty cross. I don't know if this would necessarily be, I'm just going to say that the empty cross is more of a Protestant symbol. At least it was for me growing up. And then on the right is a crucifix. What I want to suggest is this symbol of the cross and what it might mean. And you have all sorts of interpretive symbols, that you can look at with the Christian cross. You have the horizontal bar of the cross, which represents our relationship with other people. You have the vertical part of the cross that represents our relationship to God. There's all of these interesting ways that we can interpret the symbols. Ultimately, to me, what the cross and the crucifix are about is the level that humanity can go in terms of the evil that it produces, that we can take at least what we think to be the most perfect human being, that some of us say is the incarnation of God, and the only thing that this Jesus did, the reason this Jesus was crucified, was because he had, I'm going to say, the audacity to suggest that everybody was sons and daughters of God in the same way he was a son of God. He had the audacity to stand up for the oppressed, to say everybody matters. And I think if you interpret it that way, I think that the cross becomes not only an incredibly powerful symbol of, we put something like that to death, but it comes back, the resurrection. But at the same time, it allows us to look at ourselves and say, we are that capable of actually devising a way to kill a human being. And it's not just killing the human being, it's torturing and creating pain for the sake of creating pain. Crucifixion is prolonging death and suffering over time. It's not simply death, it's to prolong suffering. And here we have this symbol that humanity took this most perfect incarnation of God and not only killed this incarnation of God, but tortured it and created pain. And yet, through all of that, this incarnation of God rose from the dead. Whether you want to agree with it figuratively or literally, that's up to you. But in my mind, the point is, death was overcome. And more significantly, it was overcome without violence in response to violence. And if you look at the life of Christ, I think one of the most horrific things that we have done in an American culture is we think that we can claim these teachings, we can claim the life of Rabbi Jesus, and yet we can own weapons or put ourselves in positions where we're going to take human life. And I just don't see how you can even begin to reconcile that. So this is, to me, is just a really a symbol that we have to look at and we have to contemplate. I want to do this now because I'm not sure if there is another picture. I think the next picture is Kali. Yeah, and that's going to be for another episode. So let me go back, because that is also a symbol of God, believe it or not, just looking at some different aspects. But what I want to do is this. Moving forward, when you look at these symbols and you look at them and something is not sitting right inside of you, I want you to explore that. I don't want you just to dismiss the symbol. I want you to explore why you might feel the way that you feel. Because when something like this is accepted and people are clicking like and they're saying, amen, praise Jesus, I just saw God, I forgot, God bless these, God bless you. When you see something like this, when you see people react this way, when you see people going out and purchasing, jelly beans that are supposed to have the gospel message or something twisted like that, when it's really just a company capitalizing on Christianity. That's really what it comes down to. For us to be able to say, okay, none of these is really what we should be looking at. This is not Christianity. This is not what it's all about. This is not Hinduism. This is not Islam. This is not Buddhism. And when we have those feelings about how symbols are used and abused, we can then say, well, if that's not it, then I'm going to continue searching to find out what it is.